We are back on the Money Stop. This is your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day, presented by Kicking the Tires. He is Cole Cusumano. I'm Steven Cusumano. And after an exciting race weekend, once again at the Chicago Street Course, Cole, Alex Bowman is back in victory lane. A guy who is not on a lot of the people's radars entering last weekend comes away with another big surprise Alex Bowman win. And lo and behold, all 4 Hendrick Chevys are now headed to the playoffs.
About that, the Arizona boy, Alex Bowman, getting it done in the streets of Chicago. And yeah, you mentioned it there. A guy that was not on many people's radars at all. And I would say even for us, not explicitly, but we were very keen on those Hendrick Chevys. We said it going in. They were undefeated on the road courses going in. Kyle Larson won the most recent one at Sonoma. William Byron opened it up at Coda. And lo and behold, Alex Bowman gets it done at the next road course, street course event in Chicago. And what a win it was. Alex Bowman finally locks himself into the playoffs, the 4th Hendrick car to do so. And yeah, this was a wild event from start to finish. But just speaking on Alex Bowman really quickly once again, it was a surprise, I would say, for a lot of people. But you look at how the speed they had the entire weekend, and it really shouldn't have been that big of a surprise because they had the speed in practice. They qualified well, and just speaking on this 48 bunch in the next-gen era on road courses, they have silently been one of the better teams. We again, well-documented Hendrick success this year specifically, but as a whole, that package for that organization has been hooked up in the 2 years we've been using this current car, so they get it done on the biggest stage possible. Alex Bowman snaps an 80-race winless streak and gifts Blake Harris his first ever win as a Cup Series crew chief. And I say gifts, but that was actually, I would say even more so on the crew chief. You know, that was a very strategy-heavy race. Obviously, it was a complete team effort all around, just speaking on the difficulties of navigating this wild 12-turn road street course. But, wow, what a victory for that team. Love seeing the post-race celebrations carried out into the next morning by that 48 bunch. Really fun team to, get behind. So that was great. Speaking from an analytical sense, I think given all the unknowns, we did a really good job forecasting this race. Like, all the players that we thought were going to contend, favorites the entire weekend. Not even just the Cup Series, but Xfinity as well. The 3 drivers we mentioned that we were very high on, SVG, Kyle Larson, Ty Gibbs, they finished in that order, 1, 2, 3, SVG, Ty Gibbs, Kyle Larson, in the Xfinity Series race. That speed did translate into the Cup Series. Kyle Larson won the pole. Ty Gibbs started P2, and SVG obviously is SVG on this track. However, Ty Gibbs was the only driver to finish in that top 3 position for the Cup race. In fact, SVG and Larson finished as the last 2 cars in this race, ran into trouble very early on with the inclement weather and such. But nonetheless, I think we did an excellent job. That in itself was a huge win on our part, and I think speaks to the research we do and the kind of the grasp we have on the sport from a betting and observational sense. Even looking at the top 10, quite a few names that we mentioned during our show. Todd Gilliland with the top 10 day was my sleeper pick. You mentioned Michael McDowell as one of your sleepers. We glossed over William Byron, Tyler Reddick. So I think all in all, for as uncertain as this was, and of course Ty Gibbs finishing 3rd. All in all, we did a really good job forecasting this race. But I want to speak on the event for 1 second, being there firsthand. I cannot say enough great things about this weekend. And for anybody who is even remotely curious about attending next year, I cannot recommend it enough. This was spectacular, start to finish. I mean, seeing this carried out the way it was intended to, with all the fanfare, the pre-race concerts, it was just completely wild and unlike anything I've ever experienced in the NASCAR or even racing realm. So I think, speaking on my accounts from the city, speaking with the locals and people visiting from out of state and even other countries, you got a grasp for what NASCAR was striving to do, and they very much accomplished that in how this weekend was carried out. Like, speaking with Julie Geezy early in the week, there were 23 countries represented here at the Chicago Street Course. That in itself for me is a major win, but just walking around the downtown area, through the parks, visiting restaurants, Like, I spoke to so many people that were attending their first NASCAR race, and there was a genuine, like, excitement and curiosity, and it made me really happy as someone who's been invested in the sport for a long time and want to see it grow to the heights that it can be taken to. So I think it was a phenomenal weekend. Also, a little personal side note, I'm a big EDM guy. Attended the Chainsmokers concert on Saturday evening. That was just wild to see that rave atmosphere at a NASCAR race weekend. But that, again, like, just looking at the crowd, there was a completely different demographic. It was wild seeing all of the NASCAR merchandise in the crowd. And it just, again, spoke to what NASCAR was trying to do. It accomplished this weekend tenfold. And I find it very hard to believe that NASCAR will not hold another street course race, A, in Chicago for the next 3 years, and B, on the circuit for the foreseeable future, because this was a wildly entertaining and successful event, in my opinion. And, again, I just cannot recommend it enough to those who are interested even remotely in attending next year.
It's like, what do we have to do to get away from the rain in Chicago whenever NASCAR heads here? So the cool thing, too, is that I feel like you're starting to see, you even heard a guy like Ryan Blaney talk about it, the fact that he was maybe a little bit skeptical of the idea last year, but everyone is really starting to open up to the idea of not just continuing to go to Chicago, which would be fantastic to think about the potential of a race weekend not impacted by rain, like you got a glimpse of it with the Xfinity race, but you start to think about the possibility of NASCAR going to other big cities and other big cities seeing this as something that could make them a good deal of tourism and monetize part of, coming to the downtown area in their respective cities. So I think that this is something that we knew it was a slam dunk after last year, and that was only confirmed furthermore this year. And like you said, as far as our analysis goes, I actually picked Chase Elliott to win this race. Or actually, I didn't pick him to win, but he was one of my two favorites I picked last week, with the cited reasoning being that the two Hendrick Chevys had won the other two road course races. So we were on the right track in terms of picking that race winner, with Alex Bowman, again, just kind of running into one. And, that was the fun thing about this race, is that you had those heavy favorites in SVG and Kyle Larson, who were the two that we actually did pick to win. But, the fun thing is it was a race of strategy. And at the end of the day, part of the strategy that played into it was the darkness factor and the race ending shorter, and seeing Alex Bowman and the Team Hendrick kind of plot this race out perfectly was something that I think that you could have probably banked on. So looking at the rest of the top 10 here, Cole, we actually did pretty well considering what an unknown and kind of chaos this race was, but outside of those top two favorites in Kyle Larson and SVG, looking at the rest of the top 10 here, you had Tyler Reddick, one of our picks, finishing second. Ty Gibbs finished third, who was one of your favorites. Joey Hand finished fourth, strong run for that 60 team. Michael McDowell rounded out the top five. He was one of our favorite value picks. Ricky Stenhouse Jr., the strong day, in sixth. Todd Gilliland in seventh. William Byron in eighth. Kyle Busch in ninth. And then Ryan Blaney, who I gave an honorable mention to last week, finished in the top 10. So you could even say maybe 6 of the top 10 there at such an unpredictable track. So any final thoughts there, Cole? I mean, I know you were there. You pretty much said everything that needed to be said. But as far as that, looking at that top 10, anything that remotely surprises you?
I think they did a really good job actually forecasting this race for as unpredictable as it was. I know we didn't go into explicit detail about guys like Tyler Reddick, Todd Gilliland, and William Byron, but Todd was my sleeper. You mentioned William Byron as an honorable mention. I mentioned, or I guess we both mentioned, Tyler Reddick as that fifth favorite from that category last week. So I think we did a pretty good job. I think you look at the drivers of this top 10, you probably could have banked on someone like Joey Hand having a pretty strong run in this race, like we saw with SVG the year prior. Obviously, I'm thinking that a lot of these lineups and bets went towards Kyle Larson and SVG, who finished dead last and second to last. So that probably impacted a lot of bettors. But I think for what last weekend was and what this show is about, and that is showcasing the best odds, finding you the best values in DFS and such, we did a pretty, I would say, commendable job for Chicago.
Absolutely. Now we're going from downtown Chicago, the third largest city in the country, to the mountains of the Poconos. So this will be another fun race. It just To me, Cole, this feels like one of the gateway summer races. Like when we go to Pocono, for whatever reason, it just feels like summer. So as we head to that race this weekend, starting lineup will be determined Saturday at 12:45 Eastern time. And as always, want to caution you to take some bets into consideration before qualifying and before the cars hit the track, because there is value to be had. But other bets, such as where the odds might move in a positive direction for a better sense, or if you're looking at a DFS value based on place differential, you're going to want to wait until this starting order is determined for this race at Pocono. So as we take it to the bank here, Cole, let's look at the odds on DraftKings pre-qualifying. And we'll start with the favorite, with good reason, is Denny Hamlin, plus 400, followed by Kyle Larson at plus 500, Christopher Bell plus 600, Martin Truex Jr. plus 700, and Tyler Reddick is plus 800. So obviously what sticks out there, Cole, as we look at the favorites, is that Vegas, rightfully so, is very heavy on the Joe Gibbs Racing Toyotas and just the Toyotas in general.
Yeah, I mean, Toyota takes up 4 of those top 5 top odds for race winner, and as well as 5 of the top 7 spots. So they are heavily favoring that manufacturer for this weekend. And oh, by the way, we've been going kind of heavy on those, or I won't say heavy, but we've been hitting on the manufacturer props quite a bit these last few weeks. And we did mention Chevrolet as one of those potential bets last week, and sure enough, it did cash out. So why not take that into account for this weekend as well at Pocono, with Toyota being heavy favorites. But I think with all of that in mind, I think we have to lead this thing off with Denny Hamlin. I am down with Denny. You should be too. Why is that? He is a 7-time Pocono winner, including last year. And if you think back to 2022, technically he won that race as well, but he was disqualified for some post-race inspection issues, along with Kyle Busch, who finished runner-up in that race. But regardless, Denny Hamlin is one of the best all-time at Pocono. He has led laps over his last 9 starts there. He has a series-best 827, and his 11.5 average is the 3rd best among active drivers with 10-plus starts. But that's taking into consideration that he has the 2nd most starts in the series with 34. So over a very, very large sample size, Denny Hamlin has proven to be the best of the best at Pocono Raceway. But just thinking about 2024, these last few weeks, Denny has had a little bit of a slump. He finished 30th at Chicago. He has not placed top 10 since his runner-up at Gateway at the beginning of June. And I want to give a caution for Denny as well. I did a little bit of that last weekend as we brushed over him. But in a similar sense to Kyle Larson, there is a volatility aspect. He does have 2 DNFs. That inconsistency is kind of right there in front of you with that 15th-place average finish. But he still has 3 wins, which leads the series. He has 720 laps, which laps led, which is the 2nd most in the series. So it's never a bad weekend to pick Denny Hamlin, especially for a weekend like Pocono. But just know that, like Kyle Larson, there is going to be a volatility associated with Denny Hamlin, just given that he is that dominant and always running up front every week, that they have that affordability to kind of push it to the edge and make those bold strategy calls and kind of get aggressive on the track. So regardless, Denny Hamlin is going to be the heavy favorite this weekend at plus 400 for the race win and a steep $11,000 for DFS, which is the most expensive among drivers. The next driver I'm looking at, and keeping it in the Toyota stable, is going to be Tyler Reddick, who is plus 800 for the race win and $9,800 for DFS, which is the 6th most expensive for in that regard, posing as a very great value all around for race winner and DFS. I love what I've seen from Tyler Reddick the entire season. He finished runner-up once again at Chicago, which marked his series best 13th top 10 of the season. That was also his 4th podium finish, including his currently back-to-back podium finishes this year. And it was also his 2nd runner-up of the season. So there's a lot of runner-ups thrown at you right there. Going to throw one more at you as well. He finished runner-up in both Pocono next-gen starts. So I think for all intents and purposes, you're looking at Tyler Reddick as potentially the 2nd best option all around for Pocono. When you're thinking favorites outside of Kyle Larson, Denny Hamlin, Tyler Reddick is very much in that same vein. He is up to 3rd in the standings. He has been, by far and away, in my opinion, one of the best cars all season. It's just been a matter of closing it out because he's had the speed. He probably should have about 3 wins on par with those guys like Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin, but you got to close it out, bottom line. And then, again, just want to close out on Pocono really quick. Mention the 2 runner-ups in the next-gen car. Also led 15 laps last year and has a 3-race top 10 streak going there with the lowest finish of 11th in his last 4 starts at Pocono. So for a place touted as the tricky triangle, Tyler Reddick should be a very good bet to tame that this weekend.
And we kind of glanced over the fact that Tyler Reddick almost won this race at Chicago on the slicks. Like you said, he just kind of couldn't close it out there at the end. And that's something that's going to come with experience. And the more races under Tyler Reddick's belt, the more agonizing defeats like that, where he finished runner-up last week too, the more you're going to see him just become more composed as a driver and come to a track that he's very comfortable at this week. But I'm going to go devil's advocate here, Cole, and pick a couple of Chevys this week. And the first of those, to no avail, is Kyle Larson at plus 600, second most expensive driver in daily fantasy at 10,800. He's coming off his third DNF of the season at Chicago after he had one of the best cars and was one of the favorites, but he had top 10s in the two races prior. And kind of the same thing you said with Denny Hamlin there, that there is obviously some sort of volatility in hand with Kyle Larson, seeing that the way that their season has gone and the fact that they can go all out for wins, especially at a track like Pocono too. And also the rivalry aspect with he and Denny Hamlin, I think, could come to the forefront at a track they're both very comfortable at, like Pocono. But Kyle Larson at Pocono, he had a 4-race top 10 streak snapped here last year when he finished 20th. Over the 2 next-gen starts here, he's led 40 laps. And overall at Pocono in his career, Kyle's got 9 top 10s, an average finish of 11.9, which is the 4th best among drivers with 10 or more starts, and he has 16. So you're just looking at a guy that, listen, he's the favorite. He's a favorite every week. It's a great track for him. He's had great success this year. He checks all the boxes, but you're just keeping in the back of your mind that there is a certain amount of volatility that comes with Kyle Larson, but that's no different than any other week. His teammate, though, William Byron, another guy that it's had such a bizarre season, honestly. He was one of the favorites for the championship when we first dropped the green flag on 2024, but as you look at him now, he's been so inconsistent. He is plus 1,000 for the win this week. He's 10,000 in daily fantasy, which is the 5th most expensive driver, which is a pretty steep price, but he is one of the best values out of the favorites here. And here is why. He did finish 11th last week at Chicago for his, he finished in the top 10, which was his 11th top 10, second most in the sport at Chicago. Obviously, though, there have been the inconsistencies, because even when you include that top 10, he's had a 17th place average finish over his last 5 starts. And if you look at William Byron at Pocono, I think that you're looking at a very consistent driver, at least at this track. He's got an average finish inside the top 10 in 10 starts at Pocono, which is actually the best among drivers with 10 or more starts at the Tricky Triangle. However, he has not finished inside the top 10 there in the next-gen era. He finished 3rd there in 2021. He had the pole there and 60 laps led in 2023. 95 laps led over his last 5 starts there, so he's run well. He just hasn't finished well. In the next-gen, he's finished 12th and 14th, which even then is respectable. And he had a lowest finish of 18th in his 10 starts, and his only finish outside of the top 15 was that 18th place finish. So he's had a very high floor at Pocono. That's what I like about William Byron this week, is that he's finished basically in the top 15 in every single start he's made at this track. He's, for the most part, run in the top 5, again, leading nearly 100 laps over the recent history at this track. I know the results don't reflect it over these 2 next-gen starts, but he's led the laps. He has shown that he is a very competitive driver at Pocono his whole career. Whether the results back it up or not, you got to read a little deeper than that sometimes. And I think when you do, the results would show you that William Byron is a good pick for a favorite this week.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, obviously all the talk's going to be on Denny Hamlin, Kyle Larson. I mentioned obviously Tyler Reddick, but I think if you're looking for someone who's going to be very reliable for daily fantasy, William Byron's got to be your pick. I mean, $10,000, it is a little steep, but I think for a favorite and for someone who has proven to be a top 15 car at pretty much at a minimum at this track throughout his career in 10 starts, that's a really, really good driver to go with. Someone that shouldn't tank your lineup and someone who has potential to obviously win. He's proven that he could do it. He's a 3-time winner this season. And I don't see why not. I mean, obviously all the talk's going to be on Toyota, but William Byron should be a very good sleeper pick for a winner and for DFS this weekend.
Let's move on to sleepers here, Cole. I'll kick this one off and just keep it in the Chevy family because I've already got 2 Hendrick Chevys under my belt. Might as well go with a third. I'm going to go with Chase Elliott as one of the best sleepers in this week's race, as he is also just outside the top 5 in odds. That's why he's a sleeper. And he is valued at 9,500 in daily fantasy, which is a very strong value because that is the 7th most expensive among drivers He had his top 20 streak snapped at 19 races last week when he finished 21st at Chicago. So he has still finished 21st or better in 20 straight races, which is extremely strong for Chase Elliott. And looking at the results at Pocono, he's had top 10s in 9 out of 14 starts at this track, including both of the next-gen starts. He inherited a win from third in 2022 and a 13.8 average finish in 14 starts at the Tricky Triangle, includes only one DNF. So you're looking at another high-floor driver in Chase Elliott to go along with the other two Hendrick Chevys. And listen, the thing we haven't mentioned too is that at these intermediate high-speed tracks this year, like Pocono, Hendrick has had some of the best speed in all of the garage. And that's why I'm very keen on the Hendrick Chevys this week, including Chase Elliott. But as we've talked about the Chevys, we have talked about the Fords. Let's talk about some Fords now, Cole. I got to talk about Ryan Blaney, the defending champion of the sport, plus 1,600 for the win, 9,300 in daily fantasy, which is a step behind Chase Elliott, so a very solid value. Coming off that top 10 at Chicago, he's marked back-to-back top 10s with 4 over his last 5 starts as well. And looking at Pocono, I think of Ryan Blaney and I think of Pocono because this was the site of his first Cup Series win back in 2017. However, the last 2 years at the next gen, when we use the next gen at Pocono, he's not placed better than 30th. So he has led laps in both starts, but obviously has just run into some trouble at this track, which has been kind to him otherwise in his career. In 2021, he finished 5th and 6th. He's got 6 top 10s, 10 top 15s out of 14 starts. So I know that the results haven't been there in the next gen because anytime you finish lower than 30th, obviously there's some kind of an outside circumstance, whether you got run into or there was mechanical troubles. It's not indicative of how well he ran. And what we know is he led laps in both starts and that this is a great place for Ryan Blaney. So I think a lot of people are not going to be talking about Blaney this week, but again, coming off the strong result, the track that's been kind to him, and he's run well here regardless of the back-to-back poor finishes at this track. I kind of look at him in the same vein as someone like William Byron, who's coming off of a couple of not so great races or results at least at Pocono, but I'm definitely looking at Ryan Blaney as a medium-priced driver this week that I think we should definitely be keeping an eye on.
Yeah, that value of a $9,300 is a really excellent value for someone like Ryan Blaney and his caliber driver at this track. I think especially what I'm looking at is the consistency over his last 5-race stretch, those 4 top 10s. Really, really remarkable in my opinion for someone who didn't have the best stretch of consistency to begin the year. And I think always going to the side of your first win always brings out some good mojo. So I do like Ryan Blaney quite a bit this weekend. And for me, I will keep it in the Ford camp as well with a driver I'm very intrigued by this weekend because it's a driver that's had a lot of success at Pocono. He's had a lot of speed this season, but he's hit a little bit of a skid here over the last 3-race stretch, and that's Brad Keselowski, who is plus 1,600 for the race win as well, right on par with Ryan Blaney, and a nice value at $8,800 for DFS, which is only the 10th most expensive in the garage. And Brad Keselowski, over his last 3 races, has not finished above 18th, which is a little bit alarming when you consider that from a results sense, but the speed has still been there. Got to keep into account that he started top 10 in all 3 of those races where he did finish 18th or worse. And the 6 races prior to that, he finished inside the top 15 with 3 podium finishes, a win, and an additional top 10. So we know Brad Keselowski has been a much more competitive driver this season. And for that, I'm not taking too much stock into his 14th and 16th place finishes in the next gen at Pocono. I'm thinking more so about this season and what we've seen from him as a top 10 contender on a weekly basis. I'm not taking a whole lot of stock into these last 3 starts because there were a lot of unknowns with the multiple overtimes, the weather in Chicago, and plus him not being the best on the road courses in general in the next-gen era. So I'm thinking more so about Brad Keselowski of old from Pocono. He is a one-time winner here back in 2011, over 200 laps led, and his 10.9 average finish is the second best, actually, among drivers with 10-plus starts, and he has 26 in his career there. So Brad Keselowski, I'm not ready to bet him for a winner this weekend. I might be intrigued by a top 10 prop bet. I do love his value for DFS at $8,800. Just speaking on somebody who's had success in the past at Pocono and historically at Pocono, and as someone who has had speed this entire season, in my opinion, from that Ford camp. So BK is someone who I'm intrigued by more than anything, but someone who should be a really solid daily fantasy value for your lineup. And finally, I got to keep rolling with Ty Gibbs. I love what I've seen from this kid all season, but especially these past few weeks, and definitely at Chicago. He is plus 1,000 for the race win and only $9,000 for DFS, which is just above Brad Keselowski, the ninth most expensive in that regard. So I think Ty Gibbs might be the best value in this category. Coming off that dominant weekend in Chicago, finished second in the Xfinity Series race, third in the Cup Series race, and that was his first top 10 since the end of May at Charlotte. We did mention that slump through that strategy-heavy stretch. I know it was a little bit of a challenge for him and Chris Gale on that number 54 team, but I think we've seen what they can do this season. They began the year as one of the most consistent drivers with a 5-race top 10 stretch. We saw what he did in the Xfinity Series, and I think you look at Pocono as a track where he can definitely break through and finally get that win, which I feel he's very much knocking on the door of. This was the site of his debut back in 2022. He finished 5th there last year with laps led at Pocono. He also had 9th place average running position in that race, and he's a 2-time Xfinity Series runner-up at Pocono. So Ty Gibbs is someone who has been turning it on as of late, someone who's had speed the entire season, and someone who's had a lot of success and a lot of memorable moments at Pocono. So he is someone who I'm pegging as a driver who can definitely break through and potentially get their first win of this season and of their career at Pocono this weekend.
That wouldn't shock me at all, and I echo everything you said on Ty Gibbs in that he's been so impressive, obviously, since the second he's touched the ground in the Cup Series, but specifically this recent summer stretch. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Ty Gibbs is going to get a win by the time the summer ends, and it very well may come this week. I think that he's got a lot of positive momentum. He's got the speed on his side. We know how good Joe Gibbs has looked, and like we just talked about the fact that Vegas has 4 out of the 5, top 5 in odds as Gibbs Toyotas, or if you include Tyler Reddick in that mix, it would be 4 out of 5. Ty Gibbs isn't even included in that, and I like him a lot out of those who are outside of the top 5 in odds. And again, he's not very far outside the top 5 in odds, but I like Ty Gibbs a lot this week and for the remainder of the season. So let's talk about value picks here, Cole. I think that we've done really well with our value picks lately. I mean, we talked about the fact that Todd Gilliland finished in the top 10 last week. Michael McDowell finished in the top 5 last week. This has really been our strong suit, and it's a good thing because this is where the most money can be had is with the values. And talking about this mostly in the sense of DFS, but also for some guys, there's definitely some value to be had in terms of their race winner odds. And as I kick this one off, a good example of that would have to be Bubba Wallace, because you're seeing a stretch of drivers who are on the playoff bubble going out there and winning races recently. It's been Joey Logano, it's been Alex Bowman on the playoff bubble, going out there and winning, and now it's Bubba Wallace, who's 45 points outside of the playoffs, finished 13th at Chicago after a top 10 at Nashville, so he's had really good speed lately. And he's had a top 15 over his last 4 starts at Pocono, which bodes very well for that team. And he had a career-best finish here in 2021. 2 next-gen starts at this track. Bubba Wallace has finished 8th in his first start and 11th in his next start. So at plus 3,000 for the win, listen, I don't know if Bubba's going to go out there and win this race, but we've seen that happen with Alex Bowman and Joey Logano. Obviously, Bubba's a much longer shot than the two of them, but plus 110 to be in the top 10. Very solid big money bet there for Bubba Wallace. I know he's been on the more volatile side out of drivers this year, but he's had very good speed recently, and he knows just as well as anybody, that team knows just as well as any team, that they need to kick it into high gear right now. And at 7,600 in daily fantasy, also one of my favorite values this week in the field. And even cheaper than that in DFS, I don't know how he is so undervalued every week. I think we talk about him every week, but we make money on him every week, and that's Todd Gilliland. He's 6,800 in daily fantasy, coming off the top 10 last week, which was his 3rd of the season. And I know it's only his 3rd top 10, but he has had a 9-race stretch now, finishing 17th or better, which doesn't grab your attention off the cuff there. But at 6,800, where Vegas is just continuing to undermine the success that Todd Gilliland has had, I think that you look at that as a really, really good value this week. 9 straight races, 17th or better. That stretch includes 2 top 10s and a 13.3 average finish. He's led 120 laps this season, which is something I don't think you were expecting from Todd Gilliland in 2024. He's had 6 top 15s during this 9-race stretch as well. And last year at Pocono, guess where he finished? 15th. So Todd Gilliland is one of the best values in the pack this week. He is one of the cheapest of all our value picks. And as far as I see it, Cole, he is a lock for daily fantasy lineups this week, depending on where he starts. But as of right now, I'm opening up the DraftKings app, and I'm selecting Todd Gilliland's name to start off my lineup.
I couldn't agree more. I like actually both those values quite a bit. Bubba Wallace, $7,600, especially Todd Gilliland, $6,800. Just speaking on that really consistent top 17 stretch over 9 races. That's remarkable for that team, that driver. We saw the speed and the success last year for Todd. I think he's looked even better this year. He's even looked better than Michael McDowell in some stretches this year. And I think he's actually ahead of him in the point standings right now. So Todd Gilliland, he's being undermined by Vegas and the odds makers, but not by us, and for great reason. Now, we mentioned, I believe it's 5 Toyotas in this episode so far, through 10 drivers. I'm going to mention one more here in someone you might not think about on a weekly basis, but Eric Jones for Legacy Motor Club, who is valued at $7,000. This is one of those tracks where Eric Jones has a great handle on throughout his entire career. We say it time and time again with your Darlingtons, your Daytonas, wherever Eric Jones has seen sustained success, you got to keep him on notice and insert him into your lineups, and this is definitely no exception. At Pocono, he has over a 66% top 10 rate with a 13.5 average through 12 starts. He finished 9th in both next-gen starts at Pocono with laps led in 2022, and he had an average running position of 11th and 16th in those starts respectively. So he's had, in addition to the results, he's had the speed on track as well to run in the top 15, challenge for those top 10s. I do want to caution, though, he only has 1 top 15 over his last 4 starts in 2024, finishing 29th or worse in the other 3 starts outside of that. So I think, obviously, when you're talking about Legacy Motor Club and a team like that that's lesser funded, there's obviously going to be those cautions to throw in there. But I think we've seen time and time again, whenever Eric Jones has a handle on a certain track, he needs to be in your lineup, or at least considered for your lineup, or for even top 10 finisher bets, because this is a guy that's finished there 66% of his career through 12 starts. He finished top 10 in the 9th position the last 2 years of the next gen. And I think that's very palpable with this weekend. So I like Eric Jones quite a bit this weekend for as a value, as well as somebody who had a very resilient 6th place finish at Chicago after being involved in multiple incidents, and that is going to be Ricky Stenhouse Jr. at $6,500. He now has 3 top 10s over his last 4 starts in the Cup Series, very under the radar. He had a slow start this season, but do not forget the success he had last season. 9 top 10s. He already has 5 this season. He matched his top five total already from last year with 2, and he's trending in the right direction, obviously, with that really successful stretch over that those 4 races with 3 top 10s. Keep in mind, at Pocono last year, he finished 7th, and that was his first top 10 in 20 starts there. However, in his career, he has been a really solid driver there. 2 top 15s, 5 top 20s over his last 6 starts, and an 18.3 average in that span, which I know it doesn't scream, lock him into your lineups, but for Ricky Stenhouse Jr., someone who, has become accustomed to becoming more of a top 15 threat, I think that's a really solid number, a solid benchmark, and I think he's someone kind of along the lines of a William Byron on a lesser scale, someone who has a really, really high floor that I don't think is going to break your bank this weekend, especially considering the fact that he has had speed over his last 4 starts in the Cup Series with those 3 top 10s. So someone you might not consider for DFS or for even a top 10 finisher prop, but I think Stenhouse is a really, really solid bet for this weekend.
I think he's I agree, very solid, kind of glue guy in your DFS lineup that I don't think he's going to sink you. I think that there's certain tracks where you look at Ricky and say that there's a high risk involved. I don't think this is one of them. Like you said, there's been a high floor, and at 6,500, I'm going to look at where he stacks up as far as the practice speeds go, where he's going to start in this race. But if you're dwindling down on your budget in DFS, he may be one of the last drivers I pick for all those reasons that you mentioned. So As we go to Pocono here, Cole, let's get this field of 12 drivers that we just mentioned down to 6, with one from each of us per tier. So let's start this off. I'm going to go with my favorite of the week as Kyle Larson. I will take Chase Elliott from the sleepers category, and I will take Todd Gilliland from the value picks.
Yeah, for me, I'm definitely down with Denny for my favorite. That is an obvious answer there. For my sleeper, going to keep it in the Toyota camp and go with Ty Gibbs. And you know what? We'll make it a Toyota sweep and go with the Eric Jones as that value pick on my end for this weekend.
Let's jump over to big money bets here, Cole. These are our favorite prop bets of the week, where obviously you're not going to feel too comfortable throwing 5 units or so, 10 units on someone like a Ty Gibbs to win the race at plus 1,000. But you may feel very comfortable in doing the same on throwing him to finish in the top 5 or the top 10. Same in the case of our other favorites like Denny Hamlin or a guy like William Byron to finish in the top 5 or top 10. So these are odds you can feel much better about throwing a high sum of money on here. And so as we look at our favorite big money bets this week, there's a few that catch my immediate attention, Cole, but why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, for me, the 2 that immediately jump off the page are for sure the Tyler Reddick top 5 prop bet at plus 110 and the Ty Gibbs top 5 prop bet at plus 130. As you can tell, I'm pretty high on those drivers and the Toyota camp for this weekend at Pocono. And just speaking on what we've seen from Reddick the entire season, his ability to run up there and challenge for those wins, mentioned the back-to-back podium finishes going into this race with that shot at the win clearly at Chicago. Ty Gibbs as well had an excellent weekend at Chicago, someone who's proven to be a threat on a weekly basis, and I think he's finally kind of coming back to it, rounding back into form. I think that third-place finish is going to propel him to a really, really strong run here at Pocono, the site of his Cup debut. And, I was high on him last week. I might feel even better about him this weekend going to Pocono as a place where he can finally break through for his first Cup win.
Oh, I'm going to double down on those because those are the exact 2 I was looking at in Tyler Reddick plus 110 in the top 5, Ty Gibbs at plus 130 in the top 5. But I'm going to take it a step further. And obviously, you look at these 2 guys as the fact that they finished second a lot. They finished third a lot. So why not even make it a step further and take them for a top 3 prop bet as well? If you feel really comfortable in Tyler Reddick, say you're going to throw $40 on him to finish in the top 5, maybe you throw $20 additionally on a plus 240 to be in the top 3, and then sprinkle a little bit on the winner pick at plus 800. I'm looking at BetMGM right now. And for Ty Gibbs, same deal, plus 290 to be in the top 3. Maybe you sprinkle some on that along with a top 5 prop bet. You don't want to put all your chips in one basket, but I feel that this is a week where sometimes the odds make sense to just kind of let it ride on a top 5, top 3, maybe a race winner. If it makes sense as well, a top 10, but I don't think that's where the value is this week. I think that there is a lot of great value in the top 5 odds that we just mentioned. So I think any time, Cole, that you and I are doubling down on the same prop bets, that's usually a really good sign for those to come over the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've seen last weekend, too. We both agreed on the Ty Gibbs top 5 prop bet. I believe it was plus 110. Sure enough, that cashed out. So whenever we have an agreement on anything in this show, whether it be a favorite, a certain prop, a certain driver for daily fantasy, you need to be listening up, and they should definitely be heavily considered for whatever you're intending to use them for, whether it be a prop bet or daily fantasy.
Let's talk some head-to-head driver matchups here, Cole. We've talked a lot about pretty diverse group of drivers, some who are favorites every week, some who are not. I think these head-to-head matchups that we look at this week are a pretty good mix of all those drivers. So I'll rattle these off per usual. Let me know what sticks out to you. So we've got Alex Bowman versus Bubba Wallace, Tyler Reddick versus Ty Gibbs, Kyle Busch versus Ryan Blaney, Christopher Bell versus Kyle Larson, and then William Byron versus Denny Hamlin.
Yeah, for this weekend, the head-to-head matchups, I see kind of as 50-50 all around. I think people might get drawn into the Busch versus Blaney one, but I know Busch has struggled to get results. That's been well documented. The speed has been there, however, and you also mentioned earlier in the show how these bubble drivers are finally coming to, rising to the forefront, getting those wins they need and the days they need to get their way into the playoffs. We saw Logano win. We saw Bowman win. We've seen Ty Gibbs turn it on as of late. Kyle Busch is a 2-time champion. I do not expect him to roll over and go winless and not make the playoffs this season. And I could be way off on that. I'll admit that right away. but I just do not see that driver and that team laying down, especially at a place where he has seen a lot of success. He's a winner here before. He has a lot of success. He runs up front. So I don't think I would touch that one personally, but I can see where people might go Blaney over Busch. And then I guess the other one that I was kind of looking at would be Byron and Hamlin. People are going to obviously want to say Hamlin over Byron, and that's most likely the logical option. But again, with Larson in mind as well, those two drivers are somewhat volatile on a weekly basis. So I don't know that I have enough confidence to put Hamlin over Byron or Larson over Bell, especially Bell, given his recent string of success. I know he had the DNF at Chicago, but 5 races prior was a top 10 stretch for him. Got the 2 wins in that span as well. So a lot of uncertainty with these matchups this weekend, and I think they can go a lot of ways. So I would probably stray away from these and go more for the top 5, top 10 prop values as well as a DFS approach.
I'm with you. I think that, we talked about a decent amount of these drivers, which leads you to believe that they're definitely, like you said, kind of 50-50. I think it's always a good measuring test, too, for us to consider some drivers that we didn't talk about. Like, in fact, we didn't talk about Kyle Busch or Christopher Bell during this week's episode. It's kind of a good test to see how those guys might stack up against the guys we did discuss. And obviously keeping in mind the amount of risk that is involved with parlaying these head-to-head bets and how difficult it is to get them right. One thing we have been very successful with, though, Colt, are daily fantasy bets and daily fantasy lineups specifically. And I think this is a week where, you gotta, every week is different based on how you want to build your lineup. I think there's certain weeks where it's very middle heavy. You have a lot of very solidly priced drivers. And there's other weeks like this one where I think our lineup is very top heavy, at least that lineup that we recommend pre-qualifying. And as always, want to mention the fact that you don't want to lock anything in until qualifying for daily fantasy because the odds are not going to move and you're going to get place differential points based on where drivers start and finish. And you may lose a lot of points too if you pick a guy that starts first and finishes in 15th. So cautioning you with that as we run down this lineup. And I like the idea of a top-heavy lineup this week. I went with kind of 3 aces, and you rounded it out with 3 really solid value picks here, Cole. I do want to say we have $100 left over in this salary that we made this lineup with. I really wanted Denny Hamlin to be in this lineup, but based on some of the other drivers that we included as you run through this, we had to compensate for Denny Hamlin with Kyle Larson, which is definitely not a bad compensation at all, but I do want to say that if I can find a way to put Denny Hamlin in this lineup, I really would like to. But I just think that the lineup overall was much more well-rounded as it leads off here with Kyle Larson.
Yeah, and I mean, I think obviously you hear Denny's stats, 7-time winner, all those laps led over 820. You want to include him in there, but I think sacrificing his value for someone like Kyle Larson for a little less to make sure your lineup is a lot more well-rounded is an okay sacrifice. And how big of a sacrifice can it be if you're swapping out Denny for Kyle, right? So I think leading off with Kyle Larson is a great tactic here. From there, our second most expensive driver is going to be Tyler Reddick at $9,800. We mentioned his runner-up finishes over his last recent stretch in 2024. Back-to-back runner-ups in the next gen at Pocono. I don't see why he should not be in anyone's lineup this weekend. I would also consider him a lock given his value. From there, our next most expensive driver is going to be Ty Gibbs at $9,000. Again, I've been shouting his name from the mountaintops the last couple weeks for various reasons. But again, the side of his debut, he's got also a pair of runner-ups here in the Xfinity Series. And I just think that he is going to have a really good shot to have the win this weekend in the Pocono Mountains. And then rounding it out with 3 of our value picks this weekend who we felt really good about in Todd Gilliland, Eric Jones, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. I think, we named all the reasons there. Todd Gilliland's 9-race stretch of top 17s, Eric Jones' history at Pocono, and then Stenhouse turning it on as of late with those 3 top 10s over his last 4 races. This presents a really, really opportunistic lineup for, I think, a lot of bettors. I think whenever you craft a lineup, you want to go with the big names, the flashy names that are going to, assumingly finish up front and get you the most points and the most money. But you got to look deeper. You got to look at those guys like Todd Gilliland, like Eric Jones, like Stenhouse Jr. Like, those are names who are typically on a more inconsistent or less successful basis in the Cup Series. But you look at the numbers as of late, you look at some of their numbers from a historical sense or recency sense at Pocono, it just makes a lot of sense to have those three drivers to fill out the back end of this lineup.
I want to do a case study here. If you're listening to this episode right now, I want you, if you play DFS, I want you to look at the lineup that wins next week. And I want you to come back to us on social media and tell us how many drivers are in that lineup that you would have never thought would be in the lineup. Because like you said, you're going to want to pick the popular names. You're going to want to pick out of the, the more medium price drivers, a guy like an Alex Bowman that everybody knows, or a Ryan Blaney or something like that. But that's not how you make money in daily fantasy. You need to look deeper. Like you said, the Todd Gillilands, the Eric Jones, and Ricky Stenhouses of the world are going to win you first place in your DFS contest. And I want you, if you're listening right now, if you don't win first place next week, which we hope you do, if you don't, I want you to look at that lineup that does win and get back to us with who are the drivers that had the top scoring weeks, and let us know who it is, because every week you're going to see it's someone like Corey LaJoie is going to pop out of nowhere and win somebody a high chunk of change, and someone like Todd Gilliland or Eric Jones this week. So keep an eye on that. I think, again, I want to caution the fact that you don't want to lock this in until you get starting positions in tow to see that what the place differential potential for points is going to look like out of these six drivers. But based on pre-qualifying, that is where we look at things entering the weekend, Cole. This race is called the Great American Getaway 400 at Pocono. You were here last year, Cole, or was it the prior season? Regardless, you were here one of the prior seasons, and it's a great track to go to, and it's time for us to take it to the bank officially and talk about our race winner picks here, Cole. First of all, we picked SVG and Kyle Larson last week. I don't think you can fault us for that. But our sleepers did very well. You picked Todd Gilliland, I picked Austin Cindric, and those were two really good sleeper picks a week ago. If you may be new to the show, our sleepers are guys that are outside the top 15 in odds. I'm going to go first because we take turns picking first every week. And as I pick first this week, I am going with Denny Hamlin as my winner pick. I just think that there's so many guys that could win this race, but Denny is the most sure bet in my opinion. I said I really wanted him in the daily fantasy lineup. When we go to Pocono, I certainly think of Denny. And I'm going to be thinking of Denny this week as a guy that has a really strong chance of winning this race.
I mean, you got to go with Denny Hamlin as the automatic favorite if you're picking first, right? 7-time winner, should be 8-time if you include that 2022 race. For me, it's between two guys. I'm sure you can guess one of those is Ty Gibbs, but I'm going to go with Tyler Reddick. I think the stretch this team is on right now is really remarkable. Again, riding that runner-up from Chicago, got back-to-back podium finishes. I mentioned it earlier. He should have probably at least 3 wins this season already. And I think that's all going to amount to a win here at Pocono as someone who's had a lot of success here in the next gen, someone who's had a lot of success in 2024. I mean, he leads the series in top 10s. So I think Tyler Reddick is going to be an excellent pick for race winner this weekend. And I think he's going to be a race-winning pick from a DFS sense at that $9,800 value. For a sleeper, there's a few ways I can go with this, but my eyes are immediately drawn to Bubba Wallace right there sitting at 15th as someone who is also in the Toyota camp, actually another 2311 Toyota, and someone who has had a lot of success here as of late. He's gotten progressively better throughout his career at Pocono, got the 8th place finish, 11th place finish, and 2 top 10s here in his career, so I think that he is going to be a solid sleeper for this weekend. I think for the race win and for DFS, honestly.
And it's getting to that point where we're in the middle of July now where they're going to go for broke to try and win a race and punch their ticket into the playoffs. And I know they're in on points or trying to get in on points as well. But that's a really good pick because they know that they've got to start turning things up. I'm going to go with, for my sleeper, a driver we haven't discussed, and take Noah Gragson this week, who is valued at plus 10,000 for the race win. I'm going to go with him as my sleeper just because I like the positive momentum, signing on that multi-year deal with Front Row Motorsports and thinking about the speed that team has had and just the fact that we've seen Noah Gragson put up some really good results at random times this year, but I feel like it's mostly been at these more intermediate style tracks, and I just feel pretty good about the momentum Noah Gragson has on his side, and so more of a gut check than anything, but I'll take Noah Gragson as my sleeper this week.
Very nice. And Steven, we haven't done this in a while, mainly because we've gone to a lot of different tracks that have not been on the circuit for a while. But Pocono was one of those tracks that I feel like I've, gravitated towards a lot when I was first getting invested in the sport. I'm sure you can kind of speak to that as well, being one of those, as you called it, a gateway summer race. Do you have any memories that stick out to you? Because I have quite a few, circulating in my mind right now. But the obvious one for me is going to be obviously the Dale Jr. sweep back in 2014. I had never seen Dale Jr. Have as dominant as a season as he did that year, and to see him get a weekend sweep was pretty awesome for me as a Dale Jr. fan over the years. So, what are some memories, or what's one memory that you have from Pocono over the years?
Well, there's one that immediately sticks out because it was one of the first NASCAR races I ever watched. You and I got into this sport in 2008, and I remember June of 2008. You were a big Dale Jr. fan. I chose Jimmy Johnson as my driver. Our younger sister, Kateri, chose Casey Kane as her favorite driver, to no surprise. And this was one of the first races we ever watched. I remember Casey Kane won it. And so that is always going to be a lasting impression of my mind. Talking about a race that was 14 years ago, Casey Kane won in the bright red number 9 Dodge car. And that's one that definitely sticks out to me. I remember the Dale Jr. sweep. It was another good one.
I have another Casey Kane memory as well. It was the one where there was that big wreck down one of the straightaways, and Casey Kane's car went airborne towards the catch fence. That was the second one that was kind of like replaying in my mind.
Definitely a memorable one, and I feel like there's going to be more that come flooding to my memory after we stop recording here, Cole, but I think that's a fine stopping point. We'll just end this episode by talking about Casey Kane at Pocono. But let's go. It's the Great American Getaway 400 at Pocono. You were at this track a couple of years ago. You had some really fun things to say. I've never been yet, despite the fact that where I'm living right now, it's the most local track to me. It's just not in season for me to be able to get out there. But you had some great things to say about Pocono, and I know you're hoping to get out there at some point soon.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it would be cool to go as a fan, because just driving through the infield to get to the media area, the camping atmosphere looked unmatched. I mean, maybe compared to only comparable to a Watkins Glen, but I think it's a great racing community. I think the track gets it gets a bad press, but it really has put on some really entertaining races over the years, especially as of late. I mean, thinking back to the Kyle Larson tire failure where Alex Bowman once again backed into another win. So I think that it gets a bad rap, but Pocono has always been one of my favorite tracks to watch. And just speaking on the trips I've made, it wasn't also a very memorable trip as well.
Well, Cole, this has been great stuff. This is the Great American Getaway 400 this upcoming Sunday at Pocono. Hope you're able to make a lot of money, as that is the end of the line. We will drop the jack on this, the most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. That's why we call it the money stop. He's Cole Cusumano. I'm Steven Cusumano. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, stay tuned to social media at @the_money stop on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for the latest in all of the updates throughout the weekend, because there are always a lot of developing storylines based on the practice speed, starting lineups, and also really cool graphics that visualize some of what we've talked about. So that'll be the end of the line. We hope that you can come out of Sunday at Pocono a little bit wealthier. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.